This is a recording of John Tregeagle's story, a legend who appears throughout Cornish folklore, with a huge thanks to Walking Through Cornish Folklore by Margaret Kane and Alan Gorton for this overview of him. Based on a real person, the legends grew up due to his strange reputation. John was born around 1638 in Bodmin, the only child of a yeoman. Even as a schoolboy, he was different, thin, pale, unsociable, and quite cruel. At the age of 14, his father apprenticed him to an attorney in the high street, and he excelled at the work, running errands, tidying the office, and maintaining ledgers so well that when the cashier retired, John was promoted. But it wasn't long before he began to increase his wages by unilateral action, and the most exciting part of the job was to attend magistrates' court, where he could watch harsh punishments being exacted. Following the Duke of Monmouth's rebellion in 1685, the hanging judge, Judge Jeffreys, took the Western Circuit, and when he came to Bodmin, John watched how his inhumanity made a mockery of justice. John became one of the judge's informers. Amongst other fabrications, he claimed that his employer was sympathetic to the rebellion, and that his employer and his employer's wife were engaged in treasonable activities. But before they could be brought before Justice Jeffreys, they committed suicide. In return, Jeffreys arranged for Tregeagle to be appointed as magistrate and take over all of their property. Now John's true motives came to the fore. No one who came before him in court was safe, and his justice was designed to increase his own power and wealth. He deprived farmers of land and turned them from their homes, unconcerned that many died of hunger and exposure in the following winters. Then he plotted to marry 16-year-old Rachel, daughter of a successful mine owner. To do this, he made a contract with the devil. Make no mistake, he was a fully willing recruit. Tregeagle was to have Rachel and the estates that came with her. The devil was to have his soul. The mechanics were simple. Tregeagle was to play cards with Polgreen, and the devil would ensure he always won. Over several nights, Rachel's father lost his entire estate, farms, mansion, until he had one thing left. He wagered the hand of his daughter against what was now Tregeagle's fortune. Crafty as ever, Tregeagle demanded a signed deed to confirm this promise, at which Polgreen had a heart attack and fell to the floor, dead. Was everything he had worked for to be snatched away? Together, he and the devil forged Polgreen's signature. The day after Polgreen's funeral, Tregeagle arrived to take possession. Rather than agree, Rachel stabbed herself to death with a pair of scissors. Tregeagle took the estate anyway. People were aghast at what had happened to such a prominent family, and Tregeagle was charged with forgery. He pleaded innocence and called the devil himself as a witness. In a flash of thunder and foul smoke there stood the Prince of Darkness, and he persuaded the lawyers to find Tregeagle guilty so that he could have his soul. The judge was on the point of pronouncing the death sentence when the devil took Tregeagle's soul from his body, but with an unearthly shriek it squirmed from his grasp and fled. From that day to this, it rushes impulsively over the rocks and gorse of the moors, the devil in hot pursuit. Many other stories have been attributed to Tregeagle during his lifetime. In one, he murdered his wife and children, and then married a succession of heiresses, murdering each to get their money. In another, a dispute arose between two wealthy families over the ownership of extensive lands around Bodmin. This was complicated by Tregeagle having acted for one of the claimants, destroying old deeds and forging others, selling large portions of the land and misappropriating all the money. It was only after Tregeagle's death that these transactions came to light. Again, the two families sought ownership, but just as the judge was about to sum up the final hearing, the defendant called a last witness, and a throb of chilling terror went through the court as the ghost of John Tregeagle took the witness stand. It was clear from cross-examination the defendant had been the victim of a complex system of fraud. So wicked had Tregeagle been that even death had little effect. Just before he died, in his capacity as Justice of the Peace, he had been witness to a large loan. When time came for repayment, the debtor denied he had taken it out, and when Bodmin Court was told the transaction had been witnessed, replied that Tregeagle should swear to it before the bench, thinking that this would be the end of the matter. Now, calling John Tregeagle from the grave was not a wise thing to do. His spirit had been waiting for just such an opportunity. With a frightening flash, Tregeagle's ghost appeared in the witness box. Seething with unearthly rage, the ghost threw itself onto the now terrified defendant. Fortunately, the man was experienced in magical matters, and though badly shaken, snatched up a newborn child whose innocence kept the evil spirit at bay. The man had to find a way to keep Tregeagle's ghost away from him permanently. First, he employed a local vicar to exorcise the ghost, but this was unsuccessful. Next, the clergy debated how they could save Tregeagle's soul, and concluded that as the devil found work for idle hands, it must be given a task difficult beyond human abilities that would last forever. Their scheme certainly met these criteria. Issued with a cracked, leaking limpet shell, Tregeagle was banished to Dudsmurray Pool and ordered to empty it, a task that would earn penance for his sins and take all eternity. To make sure he didn't shirk, they arranged for a pack of headless hounds to guard him. Year after year, Tregeagle bent over the dark water, labouring hard but making no impression on the level of the pool. This was all watched over by the devil. Should Tregeagle falter in his appointed task, the devil could seize him. Storms were conjured up and summer heat blistered down, but still Tregeagle worked on. Until during one mighty tempest, Tregeagle had had enough and ran. Crowds of demons were at his heels. 3 times he scampered over the gorse and rocks around the lake, and 3 times they followed him. On he fled to Roche Rock, pursued by the baying hounds of hell, intent on seeking sanctuary in the hermit's cell perched on the summit. Nearer and nearer came the thwarted spirits as he scrambled up the crag and thrust his head through the tiny east window, but leaving his body exposed to their fangs. Week after week, Tregeagle writhed and shrieked as the hermit prayed to be relieved of his sinful visitor and the demons who swarmed around his home. Tregeagle howled to such an extent that none of the local people dared go near the place, and no inhabitant of the moors or neighbouring towns slept a wink at night. Not, that is, until a priest from a nearby church came to the rescue, and by some further powerful spell, Tregeagle was wafted away to a lonely beach on the north coast near Padstow, where he was set another hopeless task, making trusses of sand and plaiting ropes to bind them at the edge of the sea. His existence was one of futile toil. His despairing cries were dreadful and continuous as each recurring tide destroyed his work. He was no more welcome at Padstow than at Roche, so St. Petroc removed the spirit in chains which he had himself forged with prayer. This time Tregeagle was banished to Barepa, now condemned to carry sacks of sand across the estuary of the River Cobar and empty them at Porthleven until the beach was cleared down to the flat rocks. The wily saint knew that the sweep of the tides here would carry the sand back as quickly as it was removed. Long and in vain did Tregeagle labour. One day as he was wading heavily laden across the estuary, one of the watching hounds of hell made him drop a huge sack which blocked off the river. There to this day rests the bar of sand, Low Bar. Since the harbour of the estuary was now ruined, the locals were as distressed and angry as they had been the Padstow folk. Now Tregeagle was sent to sweep the sands of Porthcurno Bay around the tall Penwith until he had covered the rocks at Nangisel Bay. When you walk this rugged headland, you'll appreciate the magnitude of the task. At certain tides, these bars vanish and reappear at other parts along the cliff base. Then they reappear. If you stand on the cliffs, you will hear wheeling seabirds and the thunder of Atlantic breakers, and Tregeagle's terrifying, menacing screams. He is still labouring here, still bellowing in fury above the wind, his roarings predicting approaching storms. It appears that towards the end of his life, Tregeagle regretted his pact with the devil. He had become very wealthy and now used money from his ill-gotten gains to bribe the vicar to bury him in consecrated ground amongst his predecessors at St. Brioc. It was not to last. A later vicar had his body exhumed and discarded, and now no one knows where he rests. Or is that because he doesn't rest at all? Some say he became a huge bird, luring travellers to their deaths on Bodmin Moor. Others that he swoops around the cliffs of Land's End as a giant gull, and still others that his soul flits eternally over St. Brioc Downs. Beware.